in the real world, right? This week was the end of the Texas has changed their rules a little bit earlier, but for us, that's sort of the shift here. For those of us in Louisiana, that's been the shift here, right? That we've been able to do some things differently, that we're no longer under that stay-at-home order, that we're starting to see a return of life to normal, or at least some moves in that direction, right? More businesses are going to be open, more places that you can go, restaurants to some degree, casinos to some degree. Like there's a bunch of different rules that are out there, and everybody's still kind of navigating that. So we've come back to a situation where we've got this virus out there, and it's roaming around. Different people have it. They're asymptomatic. They can spread it quite easily just by breathing right within spaces. And so I'm reminded that we didn't really evolve to deal with this threat very well. I mean, the truth is, for human organisms, for human beings, disease has been a standard part of evolution. There's been a lot of it across time and space. This isn't new. Viruses developing, changing, infecting people, and so on. This one transfers anywhere when people breathe together, right? You get small amounts of breath is enough to do it, at least with enough time. But of course, for sort of evolutionary terms for human beings, this kind of thing certainly happened before, right? And just wiped out small groups of humans, right? just eliminated them. And they didn't have any idea what happened. They didn't have any idea about viruses. They didn't have any idea about how it got transferred. They didn't have any idea about what they did that brought any of this on, right? People just got sick. They died. Maybe some survived. Maybe some didn't. Of course, as being human beings, they tried to make sense of it, right? They wanted to say something about it. And so diseases were often understood, right, to be magical, right, in one way or another. This was being imposed on us, and it was being done to us because we were guilty, because we didn't behave well, because we didn't do the proper sorts of rites. We didn't honor the correct gods. We didn't do something, right, that we should have done. And I think that's always interesting to me, that kind of projection of that, because what we've done is taken something that we don't understand, that we can't see, that wasn't clear to us, and we projected it back into our fears about something that we do understand, social fears, right? We know about being judged and being evaluated. We know about getting in trouble, right? Having somebody say what you did was wrong, and getting penalized for that. And so our best efforts initially to make sense of things like these viruses was just to transfer that social model over into nature, to try to make sense of it that way. But like I said, we either made it or we didn't. We survived or not. Our choices didn't really matter. There wasn't much we could do about it. I'm always reminded that humans nearly died out. At one point in our history, there were about 2,000 humans left. That's it. It's a reminder that we are fragile. It's not this growth that, like, humans evolved and then just took over the planet and nothing could ever stop them or bring them down. They did take off. They did increase in numbers, and then they started dying out. As soon as they started agriculture, which meant that they started living in cities, diseases raged through human beings. We had very little control over these things. But we brought lots of them together in one place, and bam, it's just a disaster. So we didn't evolve for this. This isn't the kind of this isn't the kind of problem that our sort of ingrained natural impulses just sort of process. We understand, sort of viscerally, when somebody hits somebody else or takes something from somebody else or something like that, that gets immediate response. But if somebody's not wearing a mask, I mean, that doesn't register. It doesn't have that same sort of ingrained response. Thinking about your breath in public spaces, I mean, how are we supposed to do this? This just not what we evolved for. And we might wish that it wasn't the case, right? That human beings were so fragile, that we're so vulnerable, that there are so many threats out there that we can't even see or process or understand, that there's so many threats that there isn't much that we can even, do about on an individual level. We might wish that this wasn't so. And sometimes it can feel like these kinds of things are a problem that we have solved, right? We have developed a lot of technology and systems to protect us. Though we've had shortages, people say, right? Like the shelves are not fully stocked. I haven't never seen a shortage to say that there wasn't enough in the grocery stores. Some people have had trouble getting access to it, right? If they're not wealthy, if they don't have the money. But I've never once seen it when you have the money, you go to the store and you couldn't get enough food. Maybe they were out of this or that. My wife and I eat a lot of tofu. They've been out of that a lot lately. But it's a minor inconvenience in terms of the history of human beings where there isn't enough. A lot of our panic and response has been like not enough room for medical care, not enough ventilators, not enough space. But of course, in the history of human beings, there were no ventilators for so long. There was medical care was more dangerous than just being sick in many cases. It's only recently that we even had these beds or anything like it. And I think that growth in our technology, the engineering, the science, the agriculture, all of that makes us start to feel like we are or could be invulnerable. Like we could have a world where we're not fragile, where human beings aren't at risk of dying out or of death unexpectedly, or we can manage all of these kinds of risks, keep them under control. So I wanted to think a little bit about whether that kind of invulnerability is really what we want. Is it something that would be desirable or even recognizable as sort of a human situation? Bernard Williams sort of famously raises this question by imagining what it would be like to have an immortal life. So this isn't like, your soul migrates somewhere else and does something else. It'd be like living here forever, right? Knowing that you are invulnerable in that sense, that you're not going to die, that you're not going to just get old, that you're not going to get frail. And what that would end up meaning, of course, is that you could do everything over, right? If you think back to the choices that you made in, I don't know, high school, right, about how much to study or how much to focus, those had an effect on what you did later, about which sports to play or not to play, or what instrument to learn, right? Those had an effect on what you did later. But of course, if you're immortal, you can go do it over. You can now go learn that instrument, right? You can now go do those studies. Like you don't have to feel like that was lost time in that way. If you had a life that you could live over, you could live every possibility, right? At some point, you made a decision about what career to pursue or what relationship to pursue, right? And often that meant not pursuing a different career or not looking at a different relationship or not thinking about different directions that you might go. Of course, if we have an immortal life, we can live out every possibility. Like we don't have to wait and have to choose right between them. We could always take a different path and then go take a different path and so on. So Williams argues that a life like this, right, would be a life without real fears. Like if something bad happens, it's not going to kill you and you'll have plenty of time to fix it or to go differently or to try it a different way. It's most importantly not a life without regret. You never look back on and say, gosh, I wish I would have, because you always can just go do that instead. You always go fix it in that way. It'd be a life without loss in a lot of ways. It'd be a life without death. It'd be a life without viruses, maybe. I don't know. They'd probably be there, but it wouldn't be the same thing at all, right? It'd just be, we could see what it's like to have this happen, and we can see what it's like not to have it happen. Now, given human history, I can understand why we imagine this kind of heaven, right? Why humans aspired to this. Being, frightened, tiny creatures running around on the plains, right? Trying to survive with all of the different kinds of threats that are out there. It's easy to imagine, right, that after death, we'd want to go to a place where we were invulnerable, where nothing bad could happen to us. Where all of these things that just didn't make any sense and were so threatening could just go away. But such a life would be unrecognizable. Why would that be? So without fear, there is no courage. That is to say, if you don't have something that is a real risk, that is a real threat to you, you can't then decide how to respond to that threat, right? You can't decide to think carefully and say, this one is worth it. This risk is valuable. I need to overcome it. I need to deal with it. Or that this threat is real and I need to back down and I need to get away and I need to move. There's no courage without there being fear. Without there being regret, there is no wisdom. That is to say, without the possibility that you take the wrong path or that you make a mistake or you make the wrong choice, then you don't ever get to develop any kind of wisdom. That is the choice to look at a situation and discern what you should be doing and how you should be doing it, to think carefully and make the right kind of decision. Well, they're all right if you can just keep doing every one of them. They're all right if there's no regret. They're all right if you can just go back and do it again. So though we do make lots of mistakes and there are plenty of things to regret, we need that possibility in order to develop wisdom in that way. So without loss, without death, in a way, there's no real choice. Like, it doesn't really matter which thing you do next because you'll get to do all of them, right? Everything will be possible. There's no real freedom in a sense, right? Because you don't choose on any basis. It's just whatever, is next. If you get to do all of them, it doesn't matter. There's no real engagement with the actual world, right? There's nothing at stake if you are invulnerable. Nothing could get you. So in that sense, I think we do need these kinds of viruses. I think it's one thing that COVID-19 has brought clear to us, that we are vulnerable. Now, it's not that we should cultivate these viruses. I'm not suggesting anything like that. But we should be aware of how they've helped us think about our vulnerabilities and our connections, and given us an opportunity to decide how to respond well to those situations. It's going to need our courage and our wisdom, right, to be able to handle this. As we back off and give ourselves more legal freedom to go to different businesses and go do different things, it's now going to require a lot more judgment on our part, a lot more wisdom on our part to decide which things are worth it, which things do we need, and which are not. It's going to require a lot more courage on our part to sometimes say no, to sometimes ask other people to stand back or not be part of it. It's going to take, I think, more courage to be able to keep the good things that we've liked about quarantine. And people mentioned various different things about how they spent more time focusing on their garden or more time focusing on other activities. And so to keep those, right, we have to protect our time. We have to think about what's valuable to us and make careful decisions about what we add back in. Of course, there are things that we want to do as well, right? We need to add those back in. So we have to balance those kinds of things. So now that we're free, or at least freer, as we're loosening up, it's going to depend more on us and our character and our decisions for us to keep the things that we like, to change the things that we don't like, right? To carry on in a way that is productive. So our vulnerability that has been highlighted by this virus helps us at this point, right? Think about what is valuable and consider what is valuable and what is important. So we wouldn't want a life without vulnerabilities as much as we might wish we didn't have to face this particular problem.